So the segment now is the research updates. And so we've got 5 different updates for you in this segment. And our format is going to be, we'll have 2 speakers, as you can see here, at a time. The first speaker will speak, the second speaker will speak and make their presentations, and then there'll be a 10-minute window for questions. The next group will then come up and we'll offer another 10-minute window for questions of either speaker. And that's how the format will work. And then because we have an odd number, last speaker will be a singular. Anyway, that is how this segment is scheduled to run. So we will welcome questions both online, virtually, and of course in person. So we are delighted that we were able to gather as many experts here for the weekend and especially for today for this presentation. Because as I said earlier this morning, there's so much going on. I know I can't keep track of it, but it's encouraging news for the families, and we're going to hear much more about that over the next hour or so. So tune in and enjoy. First, I'd like to introduce our first speaker will be Brett Billmeyer. We also have Maria Mancini from Edgewise with us this morning. But Brett is the head of patient engagement at PTC Therapeutics. He began his career in patient advocacy when he was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder in 2009. Over the past 10 years, he's worked with several other rare disease communities and has helped them establish their own patient advocacy organization. He's been working with the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community for the past 5 years. So Brett, I'll turn the first presentation over to you.
Thanks, Rick. Is this on?
And do you have the clicker?
I do not. Now, I just want to say thanks, Rick, for having us here, and Defeat Duchenne Canada. They've been amazing. I've been lucky to be a part of a partnership with them since 2018. I started with PTC in 2018 and was actually part of another Duchenne's company for about 2.5 years prior to I'm going on over 7 years in the Duchenne space. And it's just been amazing what I've seen over those last 7 years. Maria and I were here in 2019, May of 2019, in London, Ontario. First time I even heard of London, Ontario. But we were here and they had an amazing turnout. So Jesse's Journey back then did a great job. They have a great team and it's just an honor to be partnered with them. It's nice to see everybody here as well, both online and virtually. So thanks for having us. As Rick said that I am a patient myself. I get infusions every other week. I was part of a clinical trial back in 2011. I was the one that had to go out and try to find the clinical trial for it. And just kind of the unknown initially when I was first diagnosed, there was so much unknown. I had elevated enzymes in the liver, the ASTs, ALTs. I was sent all over the place for about 2.5 years just to try to figure out what the disease was. Eventually, I went to a pediatrician at the University of Minnesota, where she diagnosed me with a rare disease called lysosomal acid lipase deficiency, which is a mouthful. It took me about 2 years just to figure out how to say it, but it was a journey, just to say the least. So the drug company that developed my treatment, they treated me like family, and I became really good friends with them. And that is the main reason why I became a patient advocate. How I got involved with Duchenne was one of the people that was part of that drug company. He started working for a company in the Duchenne space and asked if I'd come over and consult for him as a patient advocate. And just the work that I did with patient advocacy with my rare disease is something that I was passionate about, fell in love with. I had a career of 22 years. I was actually a police officer, police sergeant, SWAT commander in a county in Minnesota, just east of St. Paul. And I enjoyed that job. It was something that I grew up doing, and it's all I knew. But when I was diagnosed, I started doing a lot of traveling for that company, doing a lot of education, tried to educate the medical community more than anybody, just because it was such a rare disease and there was not a lot of people that knew about the disease. I'm not going to talk much about the drug development for PTC. It's more about my job and PTC in general, our role at PTC. With patient advocacy, with patient advocacy, my job primarily is education and empowering and trying to figure out what's important to the Duchenne community. So I get out to a lot of these different patient advocacy meetings and try to meet as many families as possible and try to figure out what's important to each and every one of you. When I hear what's important to you, we don't just put it in our back pocket and try to just forget about it. I actually bring it back to the team and we try to figure out how can we help support the community? How can we bring something to this community, whether it's educational events, whether it's trying to find resource, whether it's trying to help support patient advocacy groups like Defeat Duchenne Canada. In 2019, we partnered with Defeat Duchenne Canada, Jesse's Journey back then, to do a Canada town hall. Eric and his dad, Mike and Darlene, were there as well. And it was just amazing just how we can help support. And it's important in Canada here just to try to figure out how we can get drugs approved up here. And with PTC, that's an important part of us as well, as how can we help you do that. PTC was the first company that actually started in the Duchenne space. We've been around since 1998. We'll be celebrating our 25th year next year. April 30th, I believe, is our 25th anniversary. It was started by our CEO, which is in the middle of this picture, right in the front. He's the same CEO that we have to this day. And he is actually the reason why we are who we are. And it's all about the patient. It's patient-centric. He wants to do what's best for the patient. And when we say what's best for the patient, we don't just say it, we actually mean it. And coming from, as a patient myself, it truly is how we feel. And if it was not the case, I would not be in this role right now. So PTC, we're here for you. So if there's something that's important to you, please reach out to me.
I think it's turned on.
All right.
Brett, thank you very much.
So anyways, we have a large pipeline now. When I started in 2018, it was not even near this size, but we continue to grow. We continue to get new products. And what I want to talk about today is when Maria and I were here in 2019, I think we were the only industry partners that were here at the forum. It is exciting to see on the screen earlier in between the programs, I believe there's 13 different partners now with Defeat Duchenne Canada. And that's exciting because it shows that there's a lot of different options, a lot of different opportunities, and a lot of different opportunities to find a treatment for these young men and boys. As I said, we've been part of the Duchenne community since 1998. Actually, in 2003, that's when Translarna was discovered. As you can see, it was a long road, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. In 2013, it was finally approved in the Europe in 2015. We continue to do clinical trials that they are requesting. We are a company that has an approved treatment in the US, but for Translarna specifically, it is approved in, I believe, 50 different countries right now. In the US, we are still working with the FDA and trying to get it approved. We had some good results that came out in the end of June, and again, we are still working with the FDA to try to get it approved in the US right now, and then hopefully we can work with Canada as well. Talking about best-in-class therapy earlier in diagnosis progression, my job on here as a patient advocate is to increase disease awareness, but our team specifically at PTC Therapeutics, we work with a lot of people, whether it's our science team, our marketing, our account managers. We have a team that's out there that's trying to do what's best for these boys to try to improve the standards of care. And it's not us that is doing it, but whatever we can do to help support organizations like Defeat Duchenne Canada, we are there for them. Proving standards of care is important. PTC is committed to Duchenne families through ongoing programs. On here are some of the programs that we have. Duchenne and You, that's just a website that we have. It's unbranded. It just talks about Duchenne specifically, and whether it's newborn screening or whether it's anything that you want to know about Duchenne, it's just talking about different things through Duchenne. The siblings program is something that we're extremely proud of. We've had this for quite some time. It was a first-in-class program for siblings of Duchenne clinical trials. So if there was a boy that had a brother that was able to participate in a clinical trial, but the other one wasn't because they didn't fit into the inclusion criteria, the program allows for that brother to actually participate as well. So we want to make sure that we have opportunities for the family to participate. And I know there's other companies that have followed suit and are doing that as well, which I think is very exciting and very important for these boys as well. The STRIVE program, it's a competitive program where it provides funding to nonprofits, and it actually helps support different nonprofits for their innovation, vision, and empowerment. So there's different areas where we provide funding for them. There's one in Minnesota where it was as simple as they put together a cookbook for the Duchenne community, and they got a bunch of recipes from the Duchenne community, and that has come out just this past year. It's from an organization in Minnesota that I work very closely with. I bought the cookbook, but I haven't picked it up yet. So looking forward to trying to see some of those recipes. Peer Navigator program, it's for families not only considering corticosteroids, but just families that are going through a journey and want to talk with somebody else in the Duchenne space. It's like just asking, is this normal, or my son is going through this, what do you recommend? As a patient myself, I was part of a patient ambassador program, and there was a lot of families that had a lot of questions because they were newly diagnosed and didn't have the answers. And not that I have all the answers, or not that the peer navigators have all the answers, but it's more sharing the experience of what they went through at the time. So it is a good program for these families that is available. And finally, PTC Cares is more for the US. I'm going to go through this slide real quick. This is our patient engagement team for the North American Neurology team. Again, we have me and then 6 other people that are located throughout the US. We also work in Canada as well. Melissa Rust, she is the one that is working with US or Canada right now, based out of Michigan. I did have this territory, but when I switched roles into head of patient engagement, it went to Melissa. But again, we're all over the US and Canada, and we're here for you. So if you have questions, I know that it's a little bit different in US than it is in Canada, but it's still a lot of the same things, a lot of the same questions, a lot of the same things that we can help provide. And this slide, I'll just talk about quickly. It just talks about caring for a loved one. I think it was Dr. Campbell yesterday said that you are the expert. Each and every one of you know your child, you know what they're going through. You are the expert. We're not the expert here. What I like to say about this slide is you are the coach. You are the one that kind of guides and directs and knows what your son needs. And there's a lot of people that are on your team. So you could say that you're a football coach, but up in Canada, we're going to say you're the hockey coach. So you're the coach, putting the wings, the center, the defense, the goalie, trying to put people in place and just making sure that they're doing their job. And if you have questions, that there's somebody there for you. As far as the patient engagement team, we are there for you as well. We're not the experts, you're the experts. Everybody on this slide here, the family, friends, the neurologist, and everybody else, they're the experts. But if there's something that we can help with you with, we're happy to do so. And I believe this is the last slide, measure by moments. This is a slide that I really like, because it talks about how you measure each step of the way, one bit at a time. Sometimes we're gonna have good days, sometimes we're gonna have bad days. As a rare disease patient, I've had good days, I've had bad days. I get infusions every other week. And I realize it's like, okay, today's a bad day and I need to think about it. Dr. Truba does a lot of things talking about how I can help support myself even. So each time that I hear Dr. Truba talk about things for these boys with Duchenne, it's like, okay, wait a minute, I can use that as well. So I seen her presentation, I bet you 20 times, and learned something each and every time. So as far as my job as well, in the US, specifically in Canada, I do have a lot of friends that are Duchenne families. And for me, I receive phone calls from them. It's like, hey, Brett, I'm going through this, what can you help me with? And a lot of times it might not be me that is able to help them with, but I do have resources. It's like, hey, reach out to Defeat Duchenne Canada, they can help you with that. So for me, it's like, it's nice to get those phone calls from the families, and it might not even be a family that is having an issue. It might be something on social media where they see a family struggling with something, and one family will reach out to me and say, hey, Brett, there's this family that is struggling with this. Can you help them? I'm like, absolutely. Give them my phone number, have them reach out to me. I'm happy to help them. So measure by moments, again, we are there for you. If there's something that we can help support you with, if there's something that we can do for you, again, we are in the US, but we do have a lot of resources available that apply to Canada as well. And this is my last slide. If you have any questions, my email's up there. I'll be around. I do have business cards as well. And again, we do a lot of educational programs for the community. Yesterday, I said we did over 150 programs during COVID, and all virtual programs. We're starting to do live programs as well. We help support Defeat Duchenne Canada, a lot of other patient advocacy groups. We, 3 of our team members are Spanish speakers, so we look at the community and try to figure out where the unmet need is. And in the US and Canada as well, the Spanish-speaking community a lot of times gets lost, so we do have Spanish speakers. They did a program in Dallas not too long ago where there were 79 families, and if it wasn't for the patient advocacy group down there called the Akari Foundation, it would not be made possible. But for each and every one of you, again, I'm here for you. Our team's here for you. PTC, as I said, they're patient-centric, and again, the way that I was treated when I was a patient, still great friends with those people. That's how I want our patients to be treated, as well as how our families to be treated. So if you have any questions, I will be around. So thank you.
Thank you, Brett, very much. And questions will follow Maria's presentation. And we're delighted to have Maria with us. Maria back with us, I should say, because of her 2019 visit. Maria is the Vice President of Clinical Development Operations at Edgewise Therapeutics. And in her current role, she provides leadership, strategic oversight, and guidance within clinical development operations to ensure goals are met for both the Becker and Duchenne muscular dystrophy clinical programs. Prior to joining Edgewise, Maria served as Vice President Clinical Operations at Catabasis for 8 years, with 5 of those spent on the Duchenne clinical program. She has a wealth of experience, and we welcome Maria this morning.
Thank you. Can folks hear me okay? Great, okay. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to share this information with you. So I'm responsible for execution of all the clinical trials at Edgewise, and I want to talk to you today about EDG 5506, and we have a novel approach to protecting muscle in both Duchenne and muscular dystrophy. So I have a forward-looking statement. Edgewise is a publicly traded company. I will make statements that may happen in the future. And most importantly, EDG 5506 is an investigational agent and not approved in any territory. So what is our approach? Our approach is to protect susceptible muscle fibers. So we know in Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy, some muscle fibers are more susceptible to damage due to the loss of dystrophin, functional dystrophin. So we designed EDG 5506 to protect these susceptible muscle fibers from damage, and this is regardless of mutation. We've seen in diseased animal models that EDG 5506 protected susceptible muscle fibers and also prevented development of damage long-term. So just a little bit about understanding the role of dystrophin. And so dystrophin is really responsible for ensuring when muscles and muscle fibers are called upon to contract, that they do it in the right way and in the right manner. Dystrophin doesn't generate power, but it really is supporting muscles and muscle fibers when they're contracting. So if you look at the top right image, in an example with dystrophin, the fibers are supporting each other. The green vertical lines are representative of dystrophin, and the pink long tubes are representative of the muscle and muscle fibers. So you can see in the image in the middle, when the muscle is contracting, The dystrophin is helping to spread the mechanical load and stress. And so it's when the nerve calls upon the muscle to contract, the dystrophin allows for the muscles to contract. It's not calling on all of them, but they're able to move without any damage. In the model below, when dystrophin is absent or partially absent in the case of Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy, the dystrophin is not there to help with the mechanical stress put on the muscle. And so you see in the middle that the muscle and muscle fibers are there, but without the support, it's being pulled, and there is where we think that the damage is being caused. So this is the problem that we've taken on with EDG 5506, is really to protect those muscles that are susceptible to damage. So in animal models here, what we're showing are, it's a mouse finger muscles that you can see under an electron microscopy. And they're from the MDX mouse models. And what I was hoping is to press play for one side or the other, but it looks like they're both firing. So on the image closest to me, this is during a contraction, you can see these little like blebs that are starting to form. This is in the absence of dystrophin, and that is damage forming from when the muscles are trying to contract. And if you watch it, you see the little circles are slowly starting to form on the image to the left. When you compare that to the image on the right, that is in the presence of EDG 5506, you can see during the contraction that we're not seeing that visible damage when you compare it to the image on the left. So this is just an example of some of the animal studies that we have seen and that are ongoing here in order to protect susceptible muscle fibers. Okay, so we're trying to understand the function of EDG 5506 in people. So one thing we know that during muscle damage, what we see in the muscles are injured, we see the release of muscle protein biomarkers, and we can take those and measure those by blood tests in the clinic. And we look at creatine kinase, or CK, we can look at myoglobin, fast troponin, and many others. And so as we think about testing EDG 5506, we think about Becker and Duchenne really on a continuum of the dystrophinopathies. And it's that spectrum of disease that goes from complete loss or partial loss of functional dystrophin that we're proposing to treat with EDG 5506. And again, we are agnostic of mutation. So this is for all mutations. So in terms of what we've done so far in the clinic, about a year ago, we were doing our phase 1 trial where we looked at a group of unaffected adults as well as a group of adults with Becker. And we learned that EDG 5506 was well tolerated when dosed for up to 2 weeks. We did see some side effects. They were minimal, generally mild, and it was largely dizziness and drowsiness, which went away over time. So EDG 5506 is a tablet, so it's given by mouth. It's given once per day, and you can take it with or without food. So an important question is, as we're developing EDG 5506, one of the important questions is, does it get to the muscle? And what we learned during this study is that EDG 5506 is highly concentrated in the muscle. It's about 100 times more concentrated in the muscle than in the bloodstream. So that tells us that that drug is getting to where it needs to be to protect the muscle. And we saw this not only in unaffected adults, but in adults with Becker muscular dystrophy. So we have followed those adults with Becker muscular dystrophy in the phase 1 trial. We enrolled those folks plus another group of adults with Becker in an open label study called our ARCH study. And we have been following those folks for some time now. And this shows some newly released data that after 6 months of treatment, now this is an open label study, so they're all receiving EDG 5506, we saw a decrease in creatine kinase by about 39% after 6 months of being treated. We also looked at a biomarker called fast skeletal muscle troponin, or TNNI2 for short, and we saw a reduction by about 75%, again, after 6 months of treatment with EDG 5506. So we're very excited by this because this shows that there is less damage to the muscle fibers that we talked about. We also anticipate that these decreases translate to an improvement in function and preservation of the muscle long-term. And so in terms of the clinical trials that are ongoing, it's really been fantastic. About a year ago, we were in the phase 1, and right now we have the 3 trials that are on the slide, and we have another one starting, so 4 trials this year moving on. So I'll start with our ARCH study. That is the continuation from our phase 1. So we have 12 adults with Becker muscular dystrophy. It's an open label study, so they're getting EDG 5506. And we're continuing to follow these folks. We just extended the study by another 12 months, and they're all doing quite well. Our Canyon study is our study in ambulatory adolescent and adults, and that is in Becker, so it's 12 plus. That is actively enrolling in the US, the UK, and Europe, and we're excited about that. And we also just kicked off our Duchenne trial, ambulatory boys. This is a US trial, and we call this our LYNX trial. So just a little bit more about the LYNX trial. So since the slides were made, we are actively enrolling. We have our first site open, that is in Atlanta, Georgia. And this, again, this population is 4 up till their 10th birthday, and they have a genetic diagnosis of Duchenne. They are ambulatory, and there are certain functional criteria that they must meet, and this is a stable dose of steroids. And so the children with Duchenne will be assigned to either EDG 5506 or placebo for 3 months, and then they would have an open label for 9 months. And we are looking at safety, PK, biomarkers at 3 months, and we will do, the functional assessments throughout the study. And this is active on ct.gov. You can look that up too. In terms of trial burden, we've attended so many events over the years to really understand what it means for a family, caregivers to participate in a trial. And we heard from the community. We continue to engage with the community. We look for ways to really understand what it means, the impact on the trial, and how to be able to offer a really patient-centric trial. And so we work with a concierge service across all our trials, and we put sort of the control in the arms of the family, the caregiver, the adults that are enrolling, to allow this travel concierge to book all of their components to the trial, all the visits, not only that component, but we also feel you should be cost neutral at all times. And so a big part of our, service that we offer is to front load as much of the costs, even the out-of-pocket costs, parking at the clinic, tolls, et cetera, things that sometimes we forget about, to put those all up front, so we can really minimize the impact to the families and caregivers and adult participants when they're in a trial. The other thing that we've actively done in our Duchenne trial is really to look at the visit schedule and try to incorporate some means of technology to cut down the number of trial visits. And so by doing some of these at-home elements, whether it's a collection of a blood sample, blood test, to be able to send that back in the mail, not have to travel to the clinic, we're hoping we can cut down on some of the burden associated with clinical trials. So just in summary, we're trying to develop EDG 5506 to preserve and improve function in both Becker and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Again, we are across all mutations and hoping to protect the most susceptible muscle fibers. We do think EDG 5506 has the potential to be used alone or in combination with other therapeutic agents for the range of dystrophinopathies. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
Okay, we can turn to questions now. Do we have any virtual questions from the room? And I'll just ask Dr. MacCallum to help us out here. We have Dr. MacCallum in case of medical questions, or do you have any questions, Dr. MacCallum, of the first panelists this morning? Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions in the room? No? Okay.
When are you expecting to start any sort of trials in Canada? And are you looking at it for kids aged 10 and over?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. Specifically for Duchenne, I could speak to Duchenne first. And so we are for sure expanding. We wanted to keep the footprint small for the phase 2 to really understand and move as quickly as possible. But we know our phase 3 is right around the corner, and absolutely we intend to be in Canada for our phase 3 as long as things progress through phase 2.
And I guess a follow-up question to this that I've heard other families ask before. Do you happen to know if the American sites are accepting Canadians into the phase 2 trial?
Yes. So, I'll go back to the start of the pandemic when I was at Ketabasis, and we were in a phase 3, and we had enrolled multiple children from the UK due to a lot of excitement around the trial. We enrolled them into US sites, and when the world shut down, we were very concerned about the ability to maintain that during the pandemic. And I think this has put us in a state where we remain concerned about cross-border travel. And so at this time, we're not able to offer that. But there is plans for the phase 3.
No, we can appreciate the logistics around that. I think we
Yeah.
all have witnessed the closing
Yes.
of the borders.
Yes, it's for everyone's, our priority is the community. And when I go back to that period of time, and we were very worried for our participants at that time that we would not be able to continue offering the trial opportunities. And so we would not want to see that happen again.
And I think for all of the families here, as well as online, it really comes down to safety. Within these clinical trials, there's so many safety parameters that are being monitored. And so it's really for the drug companies, making sure that they're able, for the clinical trial sites, making sure they're able to see the individuals in person to ensure that there are no safety triggers or markers that are happening at that time. Because it really comes down to safety, because there are many things we don't know in trials. Are there any questions online?
Yeah, we have a question online. Is it known yet if EDG 5506 helps protect cardiac muscle or the diaphragm?
It does not at this time. We're still really trying to understand. So we still have preclinical studies ongoing at this time. And so we're constantly learning what that might look like. I also want to add, it wasn't in the slides, but if there are any questions related to clinical trials, timing of clinical trials, a little bit more detail, that's on ct.gov. We do have a mailbox. It's studies, STUDIES, at edgewisetx.com. And I can write that down somewhere so folks have it available. I apologize, it wasn't on the slides. But it's myself and my colleague who heads up advocacy that man that mailbox. And we're happy to answer questions, provide more details on some of the studies. And we'd love for folks to write us.
Okay, any other questions before we move on to the next set of panel? Oh, Nicola, yes.
Thanks, Rick. I have two questions, actually. The first one is for Maria. So thank you so much for taking on the Becker population, because that's a huge unmet need. And it's so great that you guys are working on something for that community. And I know you mentioned Duchenne for the opportunities for Canadians. Is that also applied to the Becker community?
Yeah, so we would love to be in Canada for Becker, and we're actively trying to understand where to open up sites. So if there are leads in this room, I would love to leave with that information. We want nothing more to expand the footprint for Becker. And right now, we're in the US, we're even trying to expand in the US, because we noticed we've got some geographic holes, and we're really trying to keep travel to like a couple hours minimum. So we don't want to be sending folks on long flights, because we know we've heard from families, we've heard from participants, it takes sometimes a couple days to recover from travel. So I would absolutely love to leave with a list of sites for Canada.
We'll be sure to put you in touch with
Okay,
people
thank you.
in this room.
Thank you.
The other question I had, and it was already sort of started here, was in Duchenne. Again, you're looking at a younger population, so age 4 to 9, I think, is your inclusion criteria. And can you maybe just speak to that a little bit? Is it, again, is it to do with the mechanism of action of the drug and the opportunity for this drug to have impact on viable? So are you targeting younger groups for a reason? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I absolutely can. It's a fantastic question. So really, when we were designing, now this is our phase 2, right? This is the first time that we're going to be taking EDG 5506 in children. And so we are going in cautiously. And so we really need to the extent possible, have a group that will somewhat look similar and have the sort of functional assessments and being able to understand the group that is not close to losing ambulation. And so we really need to understand how to go into children using just the small defined patient group. And so the hope is that we could expand that over time, because with links, if things continue to progress and, the intent is always to offer an open label extension, and these children will grow in that extension and will get more safety information as they have birthdays and get older, and then we'll be hopefully in a position to offer this to the broader age range.
No, that's really great, thank you. And I'm sure a lot of that preclinical data too on whether it has any impact on heart and diaphragm will be important as well.
Yep,
Thank you.
exactly.
My last question, I'm sorry, Rick, last question is for Brett. Brett, and again, thank you so much for all the support that you do for our community. And it's so great to have an advocate on the inside that's supporting our families. But the reality in Canada is we don't have access to nonsense mutation therapy here. Can you maybe share with families, are families able to get in touch with you or with PTC to help them get connected if it's something that they're interested in pursuing, help them get access to Adelerin?
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has any questions about the nonsense mutation trials out there, or any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I have my business card that I can give you, and there are ways that we can, and some people that we can basically give you the information to. Primarily, it's going to be your doctor working with somebody at PTC, so I can kind of walk through the steps for that as well.
And the great part is that we have these people here, and they are very approachable. So talk to them and get the questions answered that you want. And online, virtually, please send questions because they'll be with us for a while today. And I want to thank both of you for your input. And Dr. MacCallum is moderating this session too, so you'll be hearing more from her as well. But thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Ryan Mitchell. We are going to have another two speakers come up. One is virtual, so that's different. But Sarah from TRiNDS will join us. And we have Ryan virtually, I guess, or what, afternoon now, afternoon. Ryan's the Director of Business Development. But prior to joining Satellos, he worked with Bloom Burton Securities as a scientific consultant, where he contributed to monetization planning efforts for clients ranging from pre-seed startups to large multinational pharmaceutical companies. Ryan completed his graduate work at McMaster University Stem Cell and Cancer Research Institute. And he authored a number of publications in high-impact journals such as Nature and Cell. So we want to welcome this afternoon Ryan Mitchell from Satellos Biosciences. Ryan?
Hello again, everybody. This is Ryan Mitchell from Satellos Bioscience, Inc. We had some technical difficulties during the Defeat Duchenne Family Forum, and so Rick has been kind enough to give me the opportunity to provide an additional recording, one where you will hopefully be able to see the slides now and follow along. So thanks again for tuning in and taking an interest in Satellos Bioscience and how we are planning to develop a treatment for Duchenne. I'll start off by mentioning that Satellos is a publicly traded company under the ticker MSCL on the TSXV, as well as MSCLF on the OTCQB. I do have the following legal disclaimers, and I will mention that there could be and will, or most certainly will be, forward-looking statements in the following slides. So Satellos is focused on restoring regeneration in Duchenne, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that in the coming slides. We are a Canadian-born biotechnology company. We've raised nearly $19 million so far to develop a drug for Duchenne, and this has really been based on breakthrough discoveries from the lab of our scientific founder, Dr. Michael Rudnicki. And Dr. Rudnicki's lab has discovered why and how regeneration fails in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and along with Satellos, a potential way to fix that problem. So we believe that the scientific rationale is established for our approach, and that is that regeneration failure does appear to be a core disease mechanism in Duchenne. And there's evidence that supports this in both the preclinical setting, using murine studies, as well as in patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy that indicate that the natural regeneration and repair system in the muscle is not functioning properly, and it is not keeping up with the damage that occurs in Duchenne patients. Now, importantly, we have also shown that enhancing regeneration can improve the Duchenne disease phenotype. And again, here we have evidence to support this notion in both the preclinical setting as well as in patients. So Dr. Rudnicki's lab has already shown that enhancing regeneration in preclinical models of Duchenne can improve the typical phenotype of the disease. And there's also emerging evidence from genetic modifier studies out of the lab of Kevin Flanagan that additional mutations on top of those found in the dystrophin gene, located in regions of DNA that are connected to the notion of stem cell-driven regeneration, can actually provide benefit in the form of extended ambulation. So that is the hypothesis and really the strategy that we're taking forward to develop a therapeutic treatment for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, a short background on muscle stem cells in the context of how they contribute to regeneration and why. So the natural course of regeneration in the muscle starts off when we have damage. So when we injure our muscle stem cells, which are responsible for producing new muscle tissue, wake up and begin to go through the process of cell division or mitosis. Effectively, stem cells are responsible for producing new muscle tissue. Now, the way in which they do this is, of course, far more complicated than most of us really care to think about. But in reality, what's happening is the muscle stem cell needs to divide and produce two different types of cells. That is, one muscle stem cell and one far more functional cell called a muscle progenitor. And on the picture here, that's one big stem cell with a zoomed in image dividing to become two cells, the purple cell and the green cell. The purple cell, for the purposes of this document, is the stem cell, and the green cell is the progenitor. Now you'll see that that progenitor cell can then go on to divide numerous times, and that's really where all of the new muscle tissue for that repair and regeneration process comes from. And so it's easy to think that that progenitor cell then is quite important. And so what this is the process whereby that original stem cell undergoes a process called polarization. Now, polarization is really a term that describes a phenomenon no different than the polarization of a magnet. The cell develops a north and a south pole. You can think of it as a map as well, a north and a south end of the map of the stem cell. And the reason it does that is so that when the cell undergoes division or mitosis, in order to go from being one stem cell to two different types of cells, it physically needs to separate the components inside of itself. It needs to push all of the factors that were responsible for making the stem cell a stem cell to one end of the cell, and then push all of the newly made factors that will contribute to forming a progenitor cell to the other end of the cell. So that when it physically pulls apart, now you get two different cells. So this complicated polarization process is absolutely critical to creating progenitor cells. And progenitor cells are absolutely critical for regeneration. And it lies within this process the reason why regeneration fails in Duchenne muscular dystrophy to repair the constant ongoing damage. So this is really the problem as we see it. Satellos is trying to restore regeneration by developing drugs which will target the regulatory pathways to correct polarity. And so in Duchenne, when we have constant damage occurring in the muscle, those stem cells are repeatedly being asked to divide and produce new progenitor cells, which can go on and repair the muscle tissue. But because of this problem with the ability to set up that polarization, what actually happens is the stem cell more often than not simply divides and creates copies of itself. And physicians looking at muscle biopsies of Duchenne have seen this phenomenon as far back as the 80s. There were many, many, many satellite cells in the tissue of Duchenne boys, but they simply weren't contributing to a normal-looking regeneration process. And so this is our solution, and our goal is to try and enable regeneration by developing a drug that will reestablish this process, recoordinate that polarization, and reestablish the generation of progenitor cells that can then go on to contribute to repair. Now, we have attempted to do this in the preclinical setting, and what I'm showing you now is a schematic that sort of sets up some preliminary proof of concept data. So we developed small molecule compounds that we hope will eventually be taken orally, that when administered to the gold standard Duchenne mouse, the MDX mouse, are able to restore this polarization and encourage the generation of progenitor cells from stem cells. And when you do that, you in fact enhance muscle quality. The muscles in these mice after 4 weeks of treatment have significantly less fibrosis. The muscles themselves are larger. The individual muscle fibers themselves are also larger. And this improvement in muscle quality leads to enhanced muscle performance and overall function. These mice demonstrated increased ambulation. They ran faster and further for longer. They took less breaks. And their muscles, when analyzed individually, were stronger. So simply by giving these mice back their natural ability to heal muscle damage, we greatly improved the phenotype of Duchenne in the absence of ever having to restore dystrophin. So our path to the clinic and our goal is to nominate a development candidate by the end of the year, after which we would then move on with IND-enabling studies, and then hopefully into the clinic towards the end of 2023 or start of 2024. And with that, I will thank you and encourage you to follow us. Please go to our website and you can subscribe to updates on our company, and we would be very happy to engage with the community if you shoot us an email. And I just once again like to thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure now to introduce Sarah MacCallum from TRiNDS. Sarah's a clinical project lead at TRiNDS, a rare neuromuscular contract research organization, and is a patient science liaison for Pharmaceuticals. Sarah received her bachelor's degree in nursing from St. Louis University and worked in pediatric and adult clinical trials for neurology, oncology, cardiology, and primary care indications. Sarah joined the TRiNDS team in 2021 and is currently supporting clinical trials related to Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other rare neuromuscular diseases. She's here today on behalf of the Pharmaceuticals team to share updates about their Givinostat development program. Sarah.
Hello, everybody. I'm here, as Rick shared, to talk about Givinostat for Pharmaceuticals. Here's my disclaimer. As he already explained, I work for TRiNDS, which is a contract research organization, and they TRiNDS is working with Pharmaceuticals to talk about the Givinostat program. Givinostat is still currently in development for Becker and Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it is not for sale in any country at this time. So this presentation is really just intended to share scientific knowledge. So the take-home messages today from this talk are that Givinostat is investigational, but the drug is designed to make the muscle repair process work a little bit more normally for people with Duchenne and Becker. Pharmaceuticals recently completed the phase 3 trial, which found that boys with DMD who took Givinostat had slower progression of DMD compared with boys who took the placebo. And Pharmaceuticals is currently preparing for regulatory submissions, completing additional analyses, and planning future trials. So this slide shows the mechanism of action of Givinostat in DMD patients. You can see that Givinostat works outside of dystrophin to inhibit HDAC. And what that means for somebody with DMD is that you can see an increase in muscle regeneration, reduction in inflammation, and a reduction in fibrosis. So the previous data from Givinostat were the preclinical findings in the mouse models. So there was an increase in muscle fiber diameter, a reduction in the fibrosis and inflammation, and better performance in the treadmill test. The phase 2 trial for Duchenne that was done of givinostat showed an increase in muscle fiber diameter and regenerative fibers, decrease in tissue damage, inflammation, and fat deposits, and then slower disease progression was shown on MRI with givinostat compared to the historical data. So EPIDUS was the phase 3 study that just completed. This was a randomized double-blind parallel group placebo-controlled study. And the subjects were randomized 2 to 1. So for every 2 kids who got givinostat, 1 got placebo. And it was conducted in the US, here in Canada, Europe, and in Israel. The primary objective, sorry, I'm short and I can't quite see my own slides here, but givinostat, the primary objective was to show that givinostat, or whether givinostat preserves muscle mass and delays disease progression. So the subjects either got their givinostat or placebo for 72 weeks of treatment, and then after that completed, they had the option to go on to the open label extension study of givinostat. So the selection criteria for the study was, kids who were 6 or older, still had the ability to walk. They had a genetic diagnosis of DMD. This drug is for any mutation of DMD, so there was no restriction on that. And then a stable steroid treatment for at least 6 months. And then they analyzed outcome measures about people who were either expected not to lose ambulation in the 18 months of the study or expected to have a functional decline in the 18 months of the study. That was the target population. And the way they determined who fell into that group was the vastus lateralis muscle fat fraction. They determined that by MRS. And I'll talk about that just a little bit more in the results section. So the study endpoints that were being looked at, these endpoints were assessed before treatment and then 18 months after treatment with givinostat or with placebo in the target population. The primary endpoint was the mean change in the 4-stair climb test. And then there were several other things that were being measured. So change on the North Star ambulatory assessments, time to rise from the floor, change in the 6-minute walk test, and myometry testing, and then of course that vastus lateralis fat fraction measure using MRS. So the results came out this summer. Just to give a little overall kind of overview of who the participants were. You can see the total number of kids that were treated on the study. There were 118 that got givinostat and 61 who got placebo. And then in that in-target group that we talked about that had that fat fraction that fell in that range of greater than 5% and less than 30%, were 81 on givinostat and 39 on placebo. You can see they were all about 9 years old, similar body weight and body mass index, and the majority of them were on a stable dose of deflazacort. So the trial was found just this year to have met its primary endpoint, with the secondary and exploratory endpoint showing consistency with the primary endpoint. I would love to point you guys to some great resources from Mattel Pharmaco. There's the press release that Mattel Pharmaco sent out initially to report the results. And then there's a really great webinar from Dr. Becker that is linked here from his PPD conference. And it tells you in a great more detail about the results of the trial. And then also there's a patient advocacy email there that you can reach out if you have specific questions, or if you were a family or patient who participated in the study and would like to ask a little bit more specific questions about the results. And then just a quick bit about safety and tolerability. Givinostat in this trial still continued to show a good tolerability profile. The majority of adverse events were mild to moderate in severity. Only 8 boys treated with givinostat had a serious adverse event, and only 3 boys with givinostat withdrew because of an adverse event. The most common drug-related treatment emergent adverse events were diarrhea, decrease in platelet count, abdominal pain, increase in blood triglycerides, so consistent across the trials, and starting on a lower dose or dose reducing tended to improve the tolerability of the drug. So next steps with Givinostat for Pharmaco. So Pharmaco designed this phase 3 study that just completed to satisfy the requirements for filing the new drug applications in different regions. So Pharmaco is working on requesting approvals by the regulatory authorities. They're also working to design the next clinical trials that are going to be needed to satisfy EMA requirements for pediatric drug development. So future trials are definitely in the works. And just to close out, Pharmaco would like to say thank you to the Duchenne and Becker community for supporting the efforts to develop Givinostat. They're especially grateful for the individuals and families who participated in these clinical trials, and definitely the sites as well. Everyone contributed to getting to this point. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. And just as an addition, on our website, you'll find that press release that Sarah referenced, and we've shared that with our Duchenne community in Canada. And now I'll turn things back to Dr. MacCallum, and we'll take any questions for either Ryan from Satellos or any questions that you may have for Sarah from the floor or online.
Is there anyone that has any questions for the two presenters? I just think it's a really exciting time in Duchenne because we're hearing about really the journey of drug development. And I know Dr. Campbell talked about that yesterday as well, but we have the early stages with Satellos and really looking at that drug development all the way to Givinostat that's just completed their phase 3 study that had really positive results. My guess, a burning question that many families would have from this is directed towards the Pharmaco study is, would you be able to talk to, in general, how long it usually takes to get regulatory approval? And I recognize that this is still very early, so just really theoretically speaking.
Theoretically speaking, it can take a few years. The trials for Givinostat have been going on for several years, and definitely working on getting those approvals is in process. There are going to have to be additional trials to get to show evidence required to satisfy the EMA regulations. So development and approvals in some parts of the world take longer, as everyone here knows. It's not always approved everywhere at the same time. So it kind of rolls out slowly. But yeah, it's a several-year process, but in some places we're farther along than others.
And this is really for the families, both here in person as well as online. It is a very rigorous process, and every country has a slightly different process, but I think that's where organizations such as Defeat Duchenne, when we're looking at an advocacy standpoint, are really important when first learning about the drugs that are coming through the pipeline, and then once we have positive results. But I agree, it does take a very long time, and I think it's just really important for the broader community to know that there are a lot of people working on advancing this agenda forward from an advocacy standpoint, both with families as well as from a drug company standpoint.
And I would encourage anybody who has specific questions about places where things are moving forward to reach out to that patient advocacy at the Pharmaco email address. They can definitely give you more specific information about where processes are and what kind of plans are in place for the future.
We have a question back in the corner for Dr. Campbell.
This is such an interesting therapy development. I didn't touch specifically on the mechanism of Givinostat in my talk yesterday, but just to put, this is definitely an emerging area in DMD. This drug works in an epigenetic way, and I didn't really get into that. But just to frame it in the things we talked about, Givinostat is working to change the pattern of gene regulation. So we talked about the gene being a problem itself. We talked about changing the MRI pattern, but Givinostat appears to work at a different level, which is what we call the epigenetic level. And people will maybe hear that term. That's a layer of regulation on top of genes that turn certain genes on and off. And this is definitely a fascinating area that I think we'll be, learning more and more about, and is definitely plays a role in DMD. In fact, our group has just had a paper accepted showing a unique epigenetic signature in DMD. And we'll be using that finding to understand a bit better about how that informs pathways, but also, hoping to work closely with Pharmaceuticals to use our epigenetic knowledge and their new therapy to look at this as a potential biomarker. So very exciting area, and I'm thrilled you guys got that positive outcome on your clinical trials.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Last call, questions from the floor or online, virtually? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Very encouraging information. Thanks so very, very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mindy Cameron, who will be joining us virtually from Santhera Pharmaceuticals. Mindy's been working in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy and rare disease space for over 18 years. Mindy is also a Duchenne mom, so she knows what this is all about and certainly brings the passion. She is aligned with patient advocacy groups, researchers, and other stakeholders. Mindy is a former journalist and news editor. Her priority is making sure that the patient and caregiver voices are included in every aspect of drug development and in policies that determine access to comprehensive and equitable health care. Please welcome Mindy Cameron from Santhera Pharmaceuticals.
Hi, everybody. I'm just waiting to share my screen here. I'm not, when I log on it, oh, hang on. It says that I have to, somebody's got to enable me to share. Can anybody see my slides? Well, I will go ahead and start while we're trying to get the screen sharing. As Rick said, I'm Mindy Cameron. Rick, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm getting messages that they can see me, but not my slides. No matter how much I prepared for this, I knew this was going to happen. Is anybody seeing my slides now? Hello? Let me just type in a message. Anybody hear me?
Hear you and we can see you.
Okay, but you can't see my slides. Can you see my slides now?
So you can now go to presentation mode.
And now it says.
And
I'm
begin.
streaming. Got it, yay.
Ta-da.
No, I just have to get this.
Thanks for your patience,
Yeah.
folks. Okay, Mindy.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. All right, I am Mindy Cameron. As Rick said, I am a longtime patient advocate in the Duchenne space. My son was diagnosed when he was around 3 years old, and he is now 21 and is a college student living on campus for the very first time. And I'm really thrilled to be here to talk to you about Santhera and a drug that we are in development with called vamorolone. I just want to re-echo what previous speakers have said. In the 18 years I've been involved in this space, it is incredible the changes that we have seen. It is incredible, not only from a treatment perspective, but from a care perspective and from a clinical trial perspective, and trying to get things made easier for us to participate. I'm sure all of you realize that the older our boys get, the more difficult participating in clinical trials can become. So I'm very excited to see companies talking about ways we can decentralize things and make things easier for families. I also think we've come a long way as an advocacy community to try to get services and supports in place for families. That's something that has changed significantly in the 18 years that I've been kicking around the space. And it's very welcome, because as these boys are living longer and more independent lives, I think services and supports are becoming more and more important. Just a quick disclaimer. I work as a consultant for several companies in the Duchenne space, so that's my disclaimer. But also I want to make clear that our drug vamorolone is investigational and it is not available in any market globally. I want to talk a little bit about Santhera. You might be familiar with this compound vamorolone from a company called Reveragen. It was developed by Reveragen, and Santhera acquired rights to the compound in 2020 globally in all indications. The headquarters for Santhera is right outside of Basel, Switzerland. However, our North American headquarters, which is growing, is just outside of Boston in Burlington, Massachusetts. As I mentioned, our lead program is vamorolone in muscular dystrophy, specifically Duchenne, and we are also starting trials in the Becker space. Vamorolone is thought to potentially be a background therapy of something kind of like corticosteroids. So why do we use steroids in Duchenne? I think everyone here probably recognizes that steroids have become considered a standard of care in DMD. I think their efficacy is pretty well established. They, on average, prolong functional capabilities across the board by several years. Here is a graph of what we used to consider milestones. I believe personally that milestones in DMD are changing all the time, and that as things get approved and as care improves, that none of these milestones or loss of milestones are set in stone. We're seeing changes all the time, but steroids certainly have proven over time to be effective in helping patients maintain ambulation, upper body strength, some evidence that we could preserve some cardiac strength too, respiratory strength. The need for scoliosis surgery has declined due to the advent of chronic steroid use. So, I mean, these are important drugs. They are important for therapy in our boys. However, as most of you also probably realize, they come with significant side effects. My son has been on chronic steroid use daily for 18 years, just over 18 years now, and he really has suffered almost all of these side effects. Particularly, I think the bone side effects start to emerge as something that's quite problematic as the boys get older and have been on steroids for longer. We have some underlying bone health issues in Duchenne anyway because of the disease and the interplay between muscle and bone. But certainly we know that corticosteroids do significantly affect bone health. There are many complications to bone health. I've also had experience with that. My son he did survive a pretty serious episode of fat embolism syndrome, which I know Dr. Ward spoke about yesterday. So you know, the bone side effects are significant. You know, a lot of patients talk about behavior changes, weight gain, the Cushingoid appearance, and the boys really don't grow normally. Again, Duchenne also affects growth as a disease, but corticosteroid use certainly affects growth as well. We see a lot of growth failure delay in this population. The other thing I want to talk about here is we do use a lot of other drugs to counteract the side effects caused by the chronic steroid use. And when we start talking about combination therapies, I'm always a little bit worried about, you know, the side effect profiles of all the different things that we're using in our boys, including some of the drugs that we're using to counteract the side effects. You know, these are all, as we talk about combination therapies and better standards of care, all these side effects accumulating are going to become something that we really need to start looking at as these boys get more and more therapies on board. So I'll bring it back to talking about vamorolone. The drug has been in development for a very long time. You may have heard, if those of us that are old timers in the community may remember talking about vamorolone over 10 years ago. It was developed by a company led by Dr. Eric Hoffman called Reveragen. And the thought behind it was, what if we could maintain the efficacy of prednisone and deflazacort while minimizing or at least lessening some of the more serious side effects. And that is what led to the development of the drug. Like corticosteroids, it is an anti-inflammatory. That is its mechanism of action. There is a slight change in its chemical composition with this double bond here, and that is thought to inhibit some of the genetic activation of other genes that cause problems with chronic steroid use. I am not a scientist, and we have a great science and medical team that could speak more to you about the compound itself and its structure and why it's different. But from a layman's perspective, I can say that it is, the composition of the molecule is different, and that is why some of the side effects that we see with chronic steroid use are lessened. The drug has been under development since really prior to 2015, but we entered into our vision studies in 2015. The longest and most pivotal, the pivotal study and the longest running study is the vision study. As you can see, we have been in the kickoff to that study from 2015. So we have patients that entered into our extension program and our expanded access program who have now been on drug for longer than 6 years. Almost all of the boys and families that participated in this study chose to opt in to that expanded access program. So we have well over 120 boys now that have been on drug for several years. We've had a lot of news coming out of the company lately. We've had a very busy 6 weeks. Within the past 6 weeks, we have successfully completed our submission to the Food and Drug Administration in the US and to the EMA in the EU. So in 2 markets, the drug is under regulatory review at the moment. I also want to have a special shout out to Canadian patients and families who are participating in a current study that we're doing called the 006 study. And that's a PIP study, a pediatric investigational program that's looking into 2 to 4-year-olds and kids that would be initiating therapy over age 7 up until age 18. So those studies are ongoing, and I really want to give a shout out to the families that are participating in those studies. But we're about halfway through them. So more news will be emerging as time goes on. I also wanted to let you know that we have a new website called Do More for DMD. This is about bone health in Duchenne and managing that bone health, managing interventions used to improve bone health in DMD. This is a brand new website. It's been online about 3 weeks now. If you see that connect with us button at the bottom, that is how to opt in to hear more direct from us as a company as we move through the regulatory pipeline that we're currently in. I want to thank Defeat Duchenne Canada and all the other advocacy groups that have helped us get here. It's been a long road, as I'm sure many of you remember. We had a late stage failure called Pulvisa in 2020. It was looking at pulmonary function, and it failed in phase 3. It was quite a big blow to the company and to the community. But I feel good that the company stuck with the community and is still working very, very hard to bring improved treatments and standards of care to these patients. If you have any questions about anything, I know I didn't say much about our data. Again, I'm patient advocacy, not medical, and we are also in the middle of a regulatory filings in 2 markets. But if you have any questions that you would like to reach out directly to ask, you can contact me at mindy.cameron@santhera.com or info@santhera.com. And if it's a medical question, someone on our Med Affairs staff will be getting back to you right away. Thank you. Hello?
We're instrumental in development of clinical trial and so on and so forth. And it's been a great partnership with all of our pharmaceutical companies and particularly in this case. So right now we will turn it over to Dr. MacCallum for questions virtually or from the floor to Mindy.
Are there any questions in the room?
I see one on the chat.
There is a question online. I heard that there is a current trial recruiting in Canada for older boys who have been previously on deflazacort.
Yes, we have 2 trials currently ongoing in Canada, one for 2 to 4-year-olds and one for 7 to under 18s. Please reach out to us directly to get the latest updates on where we are with recruiting. I know that we're more than halfway there, and I know we're still recruiting for the 2 to 4-year-olds. I don't want to say the wrong thing with the 7 to 18s. So please reach out to us directly, and I'll get the answer for you. Reaching out, you can reach mindy.cameron@santhera.com, or you can just write directly to the Med Affairs team at info@santhera.com. That's SANTHERA.